Picture control modes let you adjust settings like contrast, saturation, and sharpness directly in the camera. Whether you love vibrant landscapes or moody black and white shots, you can customize the vibe without even touching your computer. The D7000 offers presets like standard, neutral, vivid, and monochrome, and more. For example, if you're shooting a sunset, vivid mode enhances the rich reds and oranges, while neutral keeps skin tones looking natural for portraits. Hi guys, welcome back to another episode. Today we're going to be talking about how to manage your picture control settings in your Nikon D7000 to get the best images possible. So let's go ahead and get started. With picture control, you can get final images closer to your vision straight out of the camera, saving you time in post-production. Plus, these settings apply to both JPEG and RAW, giving you flexibility for future editing. So, you're probably asking, why use the picture control settings on my Nikon camera? Well, the answer is it's because it's fun. You can be extra creative with those, and you can use them in any way you want. With Nikon picture control settings, you can actually manipulate the contrast, the sharpness, the saturation, and actually, it's kind of like creating your own Fuji film simulation modes, recipes, if you might say. It's kind of like doing that with your Nikon camera and kind of getting a different feel for your camera and just using it in a different way. It kind of expands your creativity a little bit. And no, you're not going to really use your JPEG very much. Of course you're not, because JPEGs are so compressed. They basically compress all the colors and everything. So you're not going to probably use it very much. But you can use your JPEG image as a reference for your RAW file. And yes, if you're using Adobe Photoshop, it will actually manipulate your photo a tiny bit, at least with your tint and things like that, your hue a little bit, but that's really it. Doesn't really do too much. If you do see a file next to your RAW file on your memory card or in your computer, it's basically an overlay file saying I want these settings on my RAW overlaying my RAW file so that I can make the picture look like this. And usually that happens whenever you edit your photo in a RAW photo editing program. It just gives you an overlay for that RAW image. RAW images are like film. They really cannot be manipulated unless you delete the file completely or it is somehow just not uploaded correctly. But you can't really manipulate with color and everything like that on the actual pure RAW file. You can provide an overlay to give it the settings that you want it to look like. So technically, a digital RAW file is like film in a sense. It's not film, I know that, but it is a digital negative. That's why they call it a DNG, or why Photoshop calls it a DNG, because it really is a digital negative that comes straight from the sensor and burns a file onto the memory card. So yeah, that's kind of like the scientific essence of it. But really, these photo filters, the photo control modes that we're talking about are just a way to help expand your creativity and help you understand how your camera can portray images a different way. So if anything, I would definitely try these out, use them, and abuse them, if anything. That way you can definitely expand your skills and your creativity and just the passion you have for your photography. Okay? Alright guys, so here we are in NX Studio, and I'm going to be showing you some examples of what the different color control modes can do. As you can see, this is a leaf, and with this leaf you'll notice that it is a JPEG. Well, I used different a different picture control mode for each one of these pictures. As you can see, JPEG doesn't show anything in the adjustment settings for picture control, and that's because it's specifically meant for RAW. So it doesn't mean that the settings that I place or use for picture control are burned into my RAW negative. And I'll show you in a minute why that is. Now, when I open up the RAW image or select it in NX Studio, you can see that everything is completely adjustable when it comes to the picture control setting. I can even change the recorded value and change it to whatever I'd like, to a different preset. And you'll notice that the color changes. Now, none of these adjustments are permanent. They're just basically an overlay on top of the RAW negative, the DNG, or basically the DSC. Basically, that's just the RAW file that you're putting this over. So I'm going to go back to the recorded value, and that is a standard. But as you can see, I did different recording modes, the picture control settings for each image. So that one was standard that I showed you. This one is neutral. This next one is vivid, monochrome, portrait mode. And the next one is landscape. And then this one's vivid sharp. I did a couple. Oh, and this one's vivid. So as you can see, they all change. But in this raw mode on NX Studio, you actually can see the different effects of each one. Now you have all these different settings, of course. But what I was telling you before is that when you have just the JPEG, this is why you want to do RAW. The JPEG, when you have your picture control settings set, it actually burns that into your JPEG. And you can't change it. When you have your RAW file, you can change this to whatever you like. Make it more vivid and do whatever you want, really. So basically the only thing that you cannot adjust on your RAW file is your overall exposure. Like, you can change a manipulated version of your exposure. Like, you do have, you know, dynamic range, so you can change your highlights and your darks and all that stuff. But overall, if you overexpose your image or you completely underexpose your image, a lot of the times, especially with the Nikon D7000, you cannot pull that up if it's way over or underexposed. And what I mean by that is that you can't, that information just doesn't exist in your image. So that's why a lot of people love RAW, you know, because that information is built into the file. Whereas JPEG, you're losing all this. You're losing the ability to bring those darks back and you know, play around with that white balance and things like that. Like, you can definitely do it in a different program, but it's almost like that information just doesn't exist to be able to change very well. So now there are going to probably be those who they argue with me with that, but the honest truth is that RAW is always going to be the better file type. Now when I scroll over here, you'll see there's other images that I took, JPEG, RAW. I did both on purpose just so I could show you guys the different examples of, you know, why it's so important to play around with it and kind of get an idea and feel for how these different picture control modes work. Because yes, they can be fun. You can be very creative with it. So let me go back to the natural one right here. This one is standard, actually. So say you have standard and you want to play around with it in your camera a little bit. you can change your brightnesses and your contrast modes. You can change your saturation. You can change anything you want to create your own specific type of recipe. Okay, obviously I don't have clarity in the Nikon D7000, so what it does is it grays it out. So that's something that I just realized. But you know, these act like almost like a recipe to create your own style of image. So say if you want something a little bit more blah, you know, but the thing is, look, none of it's permanent. Not one bit of it. So you can basically turn that off and on, but you're gonna always have your digital negative. This is your DNG pretty much. I mean, there's not much there. Anything, you know, I think everything's turned off actually in this whole entire program. So, you know, that's just something that you have to consider, you know. But when you do, say you do use this mode and you do play around with it, you're going to change your JPEG quite a bit in your camera. Not on this program. This program already has a burned in JPEG from the standard mode. Because if I go into a different mode, which this one is neutral, neutral has its own burned in mode, just like it does vivid. This is vivid. So as you can see, the JPEG will always be the same as the picture control mode that you decide to choose, and that's burned in. You cannot fix that to a different picture control mode like you can RAW. That's why I always recommend RAW, because RAW will always have the ability to change what you want, but it's always going to be where is it? Always going to be just the basic image. You know, obviously in this picture I had a very bad exposure setting, so that's why it's so dark. But with RAW, you can bring it back by manipulating it a little bit and pulling back in some of that information. Okay, that's something very vital to think about when you're taking pictures. But your digital negative will always stay permanent and the same unless you decide to delete it. Now that's one way to get rid of it, or definitely manipulate it to a point where it has no return. But you know, it's just your digital negative is always going to be there. Okay, let's see. Now I'm going to show you another example. Let's see here. My settings are not working well. I don't know why. There you go. In my control setting. I'm going to show you another example. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and open this in Adobe Photoshop. And with Adobe Photoshop, you'll see it acting a little bit different. Of course, it's not going to work like that. Let's see if I can go. Where's my file? So what is that? 429. There it is. So I'm going to open this file in Adobe Photoshop, and you'll see the difference. Okay, you will see that it doesn't have all the information that NX Studio had, and because NX Studio basically creates an overlay over your raw negative. Okay, now say I wanted to change the colors to the color profile on here, they're not going to be Nikon specific, they're going to be Adobe specific, and Adobe's going to go ahead and change that color for you, which I don't care. I want my Adobe color to be, what did I just do? Okay, I want my Adobe color to be the way it was. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and hit Control Z to get rid of that. Okay, but as you can see, of course, you can manipulate the exposure, which is just a manipulative exposure. your actual exposure. Say your exposure is this dark or something like that. If you get rid of all your highlights, or it's just like that, blown out, and you take the picture, more than likely that picture is going to be like that, and you won't be able to bring it back down. Because no matter how you play around with it, look, if that negative is just like that, that digital negative, you cannot get that to work. Same with darks. It's the same thing. If it's like that, there's no way. So make sure, when you're doing this, you have the proper exposure and that you're using raw, so you can at least play around with it a little bit. But anyway, just to show you, the only thing that's burned in is, of course, your aperture, your exposure, and your depth. There's a couple other things too, but it just, lighting, of course, is a big concept of photography. You always have to make sure you have enough light. Light is key. Okay, so there's just different ways of manipulating images, of course, but one of the key things that I've always been told, and I need to practice a little more even myself, is that I need to definitely picture the image in my head before I take the picture. So kind of frame it out with your viewfinder, or if you're using, of course, a different kind of camera, the back of your screen. If you are watching this, or if you have an Nikon D7000 or even a different camera as well, just visualize your image before you take the picture. I just took these pictures real quick. They weren't anything specific, and I didn't really take my time as I usually do. But now I'm just trying to give you all kinds of examples of how picture control settings work. Okay, but there's just different ways of manipulating images. Okay, so I hope you guys got the majority of what I'm trying to show you. When it does come to NX Studio, though, it's pretty powerful, has a good system, and you can this is going to be the closest thing you're going to get that's going to really understand your camera, because Nikon definitely puts in, the system, they put in their program, everything your camera has pretty much, except there's a little bit more. Like these settings, as you can see, clarity is blacked out. These settings are in your camera usually, and it definitely knows up here what Nikon you're using. So that's something to think about as well. All right. Well, I hope this little tutorial on this has helped you guys. I have a lot of examples, of course, of different images that I took with all different kinds of settings. I'll go ahead and show you a little slideshow at the end of this, so you guys can just get an idea. And I'll put each on the bottom of each one what picture control setting it was. The one takeaway I want you guys to get from this, and I really think it's beneficial, is that this little tool right here is meant for people to be creative. Now, I wouldn't necessarily, it's always going to be for professional work, but if you do have a setting that you really love and enjoy, you can definitely manipulate that setting to be whatever you please. You can adjust all these to create your own recipe and to actually create your own style, especially if you use NX Studio as your editing tool. I know Lightroom is a big one that people use, but I would give NX Studio a try if you guys haven't already. It's kind of a fun program. It's not as powerful as Lightroom can be because it doesn't have all the settings. It is an older program that Nikon hasn't really updated recently, but it still can definitely show you and be a tool to help you manipulate images you want a certain way. There's just always that option. But in your camera, you have these settings. So I definitely encourage you guys to check those out, play around with them, create your own recipe. I have my own as well. and I really think that it could be beneficial to your creative style, to your creative thinking, to be able to think outside the box and do something different than anybody else. All right, well, let's get back to the video. Alright guys, so those were basically the picture control settings that you can go ahead and use. Now, like I said, they only affect really JPEGs, and they just give an overlay for raw pictures, okay, for the raw photograph, for the raw file. So this is my setting that I use for my Vivid. I use Vivid, and then I adjust mine to my liking. So this is if I ever want to use a JPEGs basically, or just use NX Studio. I have these settings set accordingly. I have sharpening up to 7. I have contrast up 1, and I have brightness down 1, and then all my other settings are the same. Okay, I do use at night. Usually I use an auto white balance to kind of accommodate, to help me get back my blacks, the darks, and the natural sky colors, and any of the kind of city lights that don't have a cast of yellow. Because if I use my cloudy, which I typically like to use, or my 5000K, then I kind of get a yellow tint. So I typically at night stay with auto. But anyway, we're focusing on picture control. But yeah, so these are my settings in camera. I'll show you right now as well where to find those in the camera when you're looking at each setting. Each and every one of these modes actually has the ability to adjust your actual settings in camera, and yeah, it just makes it kind of a fun way to be creative. But I hope this all has helped you guys. I hope that it gave you another idea of how to manipulate your photography a little bit more, to be more creative, to kind of go outside the box and kind of do something a little bit different. And yes, it is mostly for JPEGs, but I feel that you can still kind of use it for your ability to be creative and just try to emphasize your photography skills a little bit more in a different direction. Like I said, this is kind of like a recipe. It's almost like the Fujifilm simulations in a way, because you can turn it to different colors, and different varieties of brightness and saturation, kind of like
film would be in a way. Well, not like how film is, but you know, you can make it look film-like in some ways if you really played around with it enough. But I'm sure there's recipes online that you can actually probably look up. Don't know if they're specific to camera or not. I would say that you'd probably want to try to look for anything specific to camera, to the model that you have. But yeah. Also, I just want to quickly mention that this video is not sponsored by anyone, not any brand, not by Nikon or NX Studio, or you know, which is owned by Nikon, or any other brand. This is purely just me having fun with my camera and just trying to show what these modes do, you know, to help anybody who might be interested. All right, yeah, and that's it.
All right, guys, that's it for this video. I hope you learned something informational and I hope it helped you out. Please make sure you hit that like button at the bottom of this video, and please make sure you subscribe to my channel if you guys haven't already, so that way you guys can stay up to date when you get notified of future videos that come out. Thanks for watching, and thank you for being an awesome part of this community. We'll see you soon. Bye.
If you liked this video, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel to get notified when new videos get posted. Thank you for watching this video. Please consider checking out some of the other videos on the links at the end of this video.